Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, and I still live about 10 minutes from the IU campus, tucked on a quiet street off East 3rd. That night, it was just me and my dog, Hunter. It was summer, humid enough that the cicadas sounded like electricity in the trees. Midnight slid in the way it always does here. No wind, no cars, just the distant hum of Highway 46 and the occasional laugh from the houses with college kids. My roommate had gone to Chicago for a wedding. I told him I'd watch the place, water the pothos he'd somehow got to curl around the curtain rod, and try not to eat all the pizza rolls. It was a normal night. I had Netflix on my laptop, a box fan pulling in the swampy air from the open window, and the security app open on my phone because the Ring doorbell had been glitchy all week. At 12:11 a.m., Hunter stiffened. Not a bark, not even a growl. Just that low, full-body tension dogs get when their bones know something before you do. He got off the couch and pointed himself at the front door. I tapped the ring feed. The spinning wheel danced for a second. Then the front of our place popped up in grayish night vision. He was there. A man stood at the very end of my driveway, where the sidewalk meets the curb, angled just slightly away from the house. Not moving, not fidgeting, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket, head lifted like he was listening. I watched for a full minute, my heart suddenly too large for my chest. Cars passed every few minutes on 3rd, and each time headlights grazed him, he took a smooth half-step to the right into the shadow of the maple. Then he came back when it was dark again. He didn't want to be seen, but he wanted me to know he was there. While I was on the phone with dispatch, the man tilted his face up toward the house like he could hear me. I shut up. He took 2 unhurried steps toward the mailbox. Another car washed by, and he tucked himself behind the maple again. When the light passed, he didn't return to center. He stayed in the shadow, angled like he could see down the side of the house to the kitchen window. When I checked the camera again, the feed was black. Not no signal, black, not buffering. Just black like someone had put a thumb over the lens. The feed came back moments later. The porch looked empty. The man at the end of the driveway was gone. At 12:31 a.m., my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. No call, just a voicemail. When I pressed play, the recording was fuzzy with wind. Then a man's voice, clear as if he was in the hallway, whispered, "Geordie." No one calls me that. No one. That was my granddad's name for me when I was little. He died when I was 11. When I opened the front door at 7 a.m., there was something under the mat. A photo, printed at a Walgreens, 1-hour glossy. It was my living room window from about a week prior, taken from outside at night. In the glass, you could see me on the couch with my laptop, and you could see a shape behind me that I remember as the coat rack, but in the picture is taller. On the back, in blue ink, you're quieter with the TV off. I was driving back from my girlfriend Sarah's place in Akron last October, taking the back roads because I-77 was backed up with construction. It was past midnight, and my gas gauge was sitting on empty when I saw the glow of a Sonico station up ahead on Route 47. I'd driven this road dozens of times, but had never noticed this particular station before. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Faded signs, old-style pumps, and a small building with windows so grimy you couldn't see inside. But the lights were on, and that's all that mattered. The silence hit me first. No traffic, no wind, just dead quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I started pumping gas and noticed there were no prices displayed anywhere. No credit card readers either, just the old mechanical dials that clicked as the numbers rolled up. When I finished, I walked into the building to pay. Behind the counter sat an elderly man reading a newspaper. He looked up at me with his pale blue eyes that seemed too bright for his weathered face. "That'll be $12 even," he said before I could tell him which pump I'd used. I handed him a 20, and he gave me back exact change from an old metal cash register. As I turned to leave, I glanced at his newspaper. The headline read, "Local teen missing after late night drive," with a photo that made my blood freeze. It was me, my senior picture from last year. I ran to my car and drove off, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The next morning, I tried to find that gas station again, driving Route 47 from end to end. Nothing. Just empty fields and woods where I was sure the station had been. A week later, I was talking to my uncle about weird places on the back roads, and he got this strange look on his face. He told me about a gas station that used to be on Route 47 back in the 70s. The owner had disappeared one night, leaving everything just as it was. They found his body 3 months later in the woods behind the station. The place was demolished in 1982. I still have that $8 in change. The bills are old, from the 70s, and they smell like motor oil and something else. Something sweet and rotten. My sister's place is an hour west of here, out near Brazil, Indiana. 2-lane roads, Dollar General, soybean fields. The air smells like dirt and wet leaves. She and her husband finally did their first overnight away from the kids, and she asked me to house sit since I work remote and don't mind quiet. It was just me in their ranch-style house, the kind that lives low against the ground. I don't have kids. Never have. But I know the noises of a house with them, little plastic clicks, the way everything is just slightly sticky, and the monitor. They still kept a baby monitor for the younger one, a simple handheld thing the size of a deck of cards with a green LED. Out of the empty house, a lullaby started to play. It took me a second to realize it was coming from the baby monitor, a tinny melody, one of those built-in lullabies they put in swings and sound machines. Except both kids outgrew that a long time ago, and the monitor, as far as I knew, was audio only. Then I heard a voice. It was a woman whispering, not the soft, sweet mother whisper into a sleeping child's ear. More urgent, a rasp edged with panic, the kind of whisper you make when your throat won't let you be any louder. She said, "Please, please." Not again. A man answered. His voice was low, and it carried even through the hiss, the way the voices of people used to being listened to carry. He said something too soft to catch, then he laughed. I can still hear that laugh, because it didn't sound like humor, it sounded like recognition. Then she said, clear enough to cut through any interference. "Help me." I had my phone in my pocket. I was dialing 911 before I even knew what address I was going to give them. While I talked, the man's voice again, closer now, like he moved toward the mic of whatever device was captured. "No one is listening," he said. The monitor clicked, fizzed, and went silent. Then it picked up again, one last whisper that was so close it fuzzed the speaker. You weren't supposed to hear that. 2 days later, there was an envelope under my apartment door back in Bloomington. No return address. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. No note, no threat. Just a neatly sketched block diagram of a house, with X's on the corners and a circle around the kitchen and the words, "Too late," underlined twice. My buddy Jake and I decided to go camping at Devil's Lake State Park in Wisconsin last summer. We'd been planning this trip since spring, looking forward to getting away from our dead-end jobs in Milwaukee and just disconnecting for a few days. We set up camp in one of the more remote sites, away from the families and RV. The sun was setting as we got our fire going, and the woods around us were getting that deep, quiet feeling you only get in places where civilization feels like a distant memory. Around midnight, we heard voices coming from deeper in the woods. At first, we thought it was just other campers, maybe some teenagers sneaking around after hours. But as we listened closer, the voices sounded wrong. They were too rhythmic, like chanting, and they seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. Jake wanted to investigate, but something in my gut told me to stay put. We sat by our dying fire, listening to those voices drift through the trees. They'd get louder, then fade away, then start up again from a completely different direction. It went on for hours. The next morning, we hiked toward where we thought the voices had been coming from. About half a mile from our campsite, we found a clearing with a circle of stones in the center. The grass inside the circle was dead, just brown dirt and scattered bones. Animal bones, we hoped. Around the perimeter, someone had carved symbols into the trees. Not normal graffiti, but deep gouges that looked old, like they'd been healing for years. Jake started taking pictures with his phone, but when he tried to show them to me, the screen was just black. Every photo he'd taken in that clearing had come out completely dark, even though it was broad daylight. We packed up and left that afternoon, cutting our trip short. On the drive home, Jake kept checking his phone, trying to get those pictures to show up. They never did. But when we got back to Milwaukee, he discovered something else. Every photo on his phone from the past month had been corrupted. Family pictures, work stuff, everything. Just black screens with fragments of those symbols from the trees floating in the darkness. Moving into the Riverside Apartments in downtown Canton seemed like a great idea at first. Cheap rent, close to my job at the call center, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. I got a studio on the 4th floor, 4A, right at the end of the hallway. The only other apartment on that floor was 4B, directly across from mine. For the first month, everything was normal. I'd see my neighbor occasionally, a thin woman in her 50s with graying hair who always wore the same blue cardigan. She'd nod politely when we passed in the hallway but never spoke. Then I started noticing things. My door would be slightly ajar when I came home from work, even though I always made sure to lock it. Items in my apartment would be moved just a few inches from where I'd left them. The really unsettling part was the feeling of being watched. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning. I lay there frozen, listening to the soft metallic clicking as someone tried to get in. The turning stopped, but then I heard breathing on the other side of the door. Slow, patient breathing, like someone was settling in to wait. I crept to the peephole and looked out. The woman from 4B was standing directly in front of my door, so close that her face filled the entire view. But her eyes were wrong. Too wide, too bright, like she hadn't blinked in hours. She was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. She stood there for 3 hours. I watched her the entire time, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud. At exactly 5 a.m., she turned and walked back to her apartment. The next morning, I went to the landlord's office to complain. He looked confused when I described the woman in 4B. He pulled out his records and shook his head. "Son, apartment 4B has been empty for 6 months. The last tenant died in there. Heart attack. We haven't been able to rent it since." If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. A few years back, I rented a farmhouse outside of Greencastle. The lease came with a set of rules the owner had typed out long before me. One I thought was weird until I didn't. Do not turn on the back porch light after midnight. Ever. No exceptions. The first time I broke it was because I forgot. Midnight caught me washing a pan from a late dinner, and I saw something move by the garbage can, and I flipped the switch. I sat on the couch, and that's when the dog lifted his head and did the stare, pointing at the back door. There were 3 mason jars now sitting neatly on the top step. They were empty, clean, with little loops of twine tied around their necks. I didn't go out. I turned the light off, then back on. The jars were gone. I didn't hear them moved. I didn't hear anything, which is how I knew someone was there to make it go silent. At 12:57, there was a knock at the back door, so polite I wondered if I'd imagined it. 2 knuckles, like someone trying very hard to be gentle. Through the door, a voice said my name. Not the way a neighbor says it, the way a person says it who has practiced. The voice said my name again, quieter. Then it said a name I hadn't told anybody in that county, the name my dad called me when I was little. Then it switched to the sound of me. It made my voice and said, "Hey, it's me. Can you open the door? I forgot my key." People can practice your voice if they want to. They can spend an evening outside your windows while you talk on the phone, and they can make their mouth your mouth and wear it like a mask. Morning came anyway. I went out when the sun burned the dew off the grass. Near the steps, in the dirt where a mole had pushed up a little hill, there were 7 small circles pressed in perfect formation. Jars, I thought. Someone set them down once, twice, practiced where they'd go. The neighbor came over, around 10. "You turned it on," he said. "They think you're up. They think you want company." Who's they? If you hear your name, don't answer. It was a Tuesday night in October when my parents left for their anniversary trip, leaving me alone in our farmhouse in rural Ohio. The nearest neighbor was a good mile down a winding, unpaved road, and the closest town was a 15-minute drive. Around midnight, the landline phone let out a shrill, jarring ring. My heart leaped. Who would be calling at this hour? I picked it up, my hand trembling slightly. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was only static on the other end, a low, crackling hiss. I waited, holding my breath. Just the static. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A faint click, like a receiver being gently placed down. A shiver ran down my spine. That wasn't right. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of unease clung to me. Then, around 2 a.m., it happened again. The phone downstairs, shattering the silence with its piercing ring. This time, there was no static. Only a profound, suffocating silence. And then, very faintly, I heard a sound. It was like a soft, drawn-out sigh, a human sigh, and it sounded like it was coming from very close by. My blood ran cold. I slammed the phone back onto its cradle. At 12:31 a.m., my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. When I pressed play, the recording was fuzzy with wind. Then a man's voice said something I didn't hear. Then clear, as if he was in the hallway, a whisper, "Geordie." No one calls me that. That was my granddad's name for me when I was little. He died when I was 11. When I opened the front door at 7 a.m., there was something under the mat. A photo, printed at a Walgreens 1-hour glossy. It was my living room window from outside at night. In the glass, you could see me on the couch, and you could see a shape behind me that I remember as the coat rack, but in the picture is taller. On the back, in blue ink, "You're quieter with the TV off." Working the graveyard shift at the 24-hour Quick Mart in Willow Creek, Nebraska, was usually mind-numbingly boring. Most nights it was just me, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional trucker stopping for coffee. It was around 3 a.m. when a thick, unnatural fog had rolled in, making the outside world disappear. The automatic door slid open with a soft whoosh, and a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a heavy, dark coat despite the mild weather, and wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in deep shadow. He picked up a bag of chips, then a candy bar, and walked towards the counter. As he approached, I noticed his eyes. They were dark, almost black, and seemed to hold an unsettling blankness. He placed the items on the counter, not saying a word. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. His hand was large, with long, thin fingers, and his fingernails were surprisingly clean. His skin felt unnaturally cold when his fingers brushed mine like marble. As he reached the door, he paused. Then, he slowly turned his head. Not his body, just his head, until his dark, blank eyes were fixed on me again, and then a faint, almost inaudible sound escaped his lips. It wasn't a word, but a low, guttural click, like a dry tongue clicking against the roof of his mouth. It sounded primitive, predatory. A few days later, a missing person report appeared on the local news. A young woman had vanished from a rest stop about 30 miles down the highway just a few hours after my encounter. The report mentioned she was last seen getting into a dark, older model pickup truck. My blood ran cold. I remembered the man's dark coat, his quiet movements, his blank eyes, and that chilling click. I called the police and told them about the man. They took my statement, but I never heard anything more. The woman was never found. I was driving from Chicago to Cleveland for a job interview, taking I-80 through Indiana in the middle of a February snowstorm. Around midnight, somewhere between Gary and South Bend, I saw a figure standing on the shoulder. A woman in a white dress, no coat, just standing there in the blowing snow. I pulled over and rolled down my window. She approached slowly, and I could see she was young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair that wasn't even wet despite the snow. She smiled and asked if I could give her a ride to the next exit. Her voice was soft, almost musical. She got in the passenger seat, and immediately the temperature in the car dropped. I cranked up the heat, but it didn't seem to make a difference. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, not even shivering despite being dressed for summer weather. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. When I glanced over to ask if she was warm enough, the passenger seat was empty, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The seat wasn't even damp. There was no way she could have gotten out without me noticing. The next morning, I stopped at a truck stop and told the story to the waitress. She got this knowing look and asked me to describe the woman. When I finished, she nodded and poured me another cup of coffee. "That's Sarah," she said. "She's been hitching rides on that stretch of highway for about 15 years now. Died in a car accident during a snowstorm right around exit 87. They say she's still trying to get home." I looked at my receipt from the gas station where I'd stopped the night before. Exit 87. I'd driven right past the spot where she died, with her sitting next to me in the car. After college, I found a cheap basement apartment in an old house in Akron's Highland Square neighborhood. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, lived upstairs with his wife, and he rented out the basement to help with their mortgage. The apartment came furnished with old pieces that looked like they'd been there for decades. But there was one piece that seemed out of place. A beautiful antique rocking chair positioned in the corner near the small basement windows. I asked Mr. Peterson about the chair, and he got this distant look. He said it had belonged to his daughter, Lisa, who used to spend hours down there when she was young. She'd sit in that chair and rock while reading or just looking out the window. What he didn't tell me was that Lisa had died in that basement 25 years ago. I found out from a neighbor. Lisa had been 16 when she took her own life, right there in that rocking chair. The Petersons had kept the basement exactly as Lisa had left it, only renting it out when they desperately needed the money. Once I knew the story, things started making sense. The rocking chair would be in different positions when I came home from work. Sometimes I'd hear creaking from that corner, like someone was sitting in it, and on quiet nights I could swear I heard humming, a young girl's voice singing lullabies to herself. The really unsettling part was how comfortable I felt with it all. Instead of being scared, I started talking to Lisa like she was my roommate. I'd tell her about my day, my job, my problems, and sometimes, I swear, she talked back. not in words, but in the way the chair would rock gently. On my last night, I sat in Lisa's chair and thanked her for being such a good roommate. The chair rocked slowly, and I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness, like she didn't want me to leave. My older brother, David, was driving back to Montana after visiting friends in North Dakota. It was late, well after midnight, when he saw a sign for a small town, Oak Haven, Pop 312, just a few miles ahead. As he approached, the town seemed to materialize out of the darkness. It was small, just a few blocks of weathered storefronts and houses, lit by old-fashioned streetlights. Everything was dark, silent, and strangely still. No cars parked on the street, no lights on in any houses. He pulled over next to an old brick general store and got out. The silence was absolute. Then he noticed something odd. All the clocks on the public buildings were stopped at the exact same time. 2:17. He checked his own watch. It was 2:45 a.m. He walked down the street, peering into windows. The storefronts looked like they had just closed for the night. In the bakery window, loaves of bread were still on the shelves, covered with dust. A coffee cup sat on the counter next to an open newspaper. He found a hand-painted sign nailed to a telephone pole. Oak Haven Annual Harvest Festival, Saturday, October 14th. He checked his phone. It was November 17th. That's when he heard it. A faint sound coming from the small park in the center of town. It was a low, mournful whistle. Not a human whistle, but something deeper, more resonant, like wind whistling through a hollow bone, and it seemed to be calling to him. He felt an overwhelming urge to investigate, but a deeper instinct screamed at him to run. He chose to run. He sprinted back to his car and sped out of Oak Haven, not looking back. 20 minutes later, he pulled over at a gas station and searched for Oak Haven, Montana on his phone. No results found. He asked the attendant, who'd been driving these roads for 50 years. "Ain't no Oak Haven round here, son." He tried several times and following yours to find Oak Haven again, taking the same route, but he never saw the sign, never found the turnoff. It was just endless prairie and empty roads. The memory of that perfectly preserved, yet utterly deserted town, with its clocks stopped at 2:17 and that haunting whistle, still gives him nightmares. What happened in Oak Haven at 2:17, and what was making that sound in the park? Some places exist outside of normal time and space. Towns that simply disappear, taking their inhabitants and secrets with them, leaving only echoes and unanswered questions. Some say it ended that night. But I still wake up screaming, wondering what's watching from the windows of houses we think are empty. Thanks for listening. If you made it through the darkness,